All right, well, good morning, everyone. Today is Wednesday, and you know what that means. It is Wise Women Wednesday, and today we're going to talk about equity in education. I am Karla Hernandez-Matz, president of the United Teachers of Day, and today I'm your moderator. I'm just going to be hosting this great panel of wise women who are going to be sharing a lot of their knowledge and helping us understand why electing progressive women, why elections matter, and how we continue to pursue equity in all systems. So I'm going to start off by just sharing a little spotlight, right? We have been talking, there's a national movement on Black Lives Matter, and we know that we're at a pivotal point in history. For centuries, this country has had systemic things, systematic racism occur on many institutions. And so here we are at a pivotal point. And I think that it is pivotal that we talk about public education, that we talk about the importance of equity and how that, what that means to our children, what that means to our future. And that's why we have these three amazing women who are fighting for their constituents, who are making sure that things are better, not just for the constituents, but everybody as we move forward. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce them. I'm going to say a little bit about them. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and say a little bit about themselves. And then we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of this. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with, we have three House representatives. They're not in a particular order, but I'm going to go ahead and start them off in this manner. We're going to start off with Fentrice Driskell. She's out of Hillsborough County, House District 63. She is a Democratic woman. And of course, she's also a Harvard graduate. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Representative Driskell. Tell us, what you've done and how you plan to continue to fight for us.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. So I actually grew up in Polk County, which is nearby to Hillsborough County, and it has, I always like to say, strong Southern and sometimes rural influences. But I'm a product of Florida's public schools. My mom taught public school for over 35 years. My dad worked at Publix, and they always instilled in my sisters and me the importance of an education and to work hard. So with a public school education, I was able to attain my dream, as you mentioned, of going to Harvard. I went on to Georgetown for law school, and I've been practicing law in Tampa, Florida since 2006. But I feel like our public schools looked very different when I was in them over however many years ago. I'm not going to say that, a long time ago, over 20 years ago. And, part of what has changed has been a movement towards charter schools that are run by for-profit boards. We see an expansion, I believe, a constitutional expansion of, I'm getting a feedback. Can you guys hear me okay?
Now we can.
Okay, an expansion, what I believe is an unconstitutional expansion towards voucher systems. And so we're siphoning money away from our traditional public schools. We leave them scrambling. We leave them really gasping for air oftentimes. So I want to thank Ruthless for spotlighting this conversation because it's really so very important. We know that with an education, public education in America is the great equalizer. And if we fund public education properly and give students that fighting chance that they need for success in life, I think we'll see a lot more equity in other places of society as well. So thanks so much, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Representative. I agree with you, and we're actually going to capture some of what you said in more detail because I really want all of our listening and viewing audience to really understand how education is happening right now, how it's been shaped by the past, and how we continue to fight for quality public education, and we still see systems of inequality embedded within it. So we will get back to that. That is excellent. I also want to introduce to you all and welcome Ms. Tina Polsky. She is from House District 81, which is Palm Beach County. She is, of course, a Democratic fierce warrior woman, and she is a graduate from Columbia University. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. So I represent District 81, which is a part of Palm Beach County, some of the western areas, including some of the agricultural areas and the glades. So very suburban in some parts and then more rural in others. So it's very interesting to work on the topic of education because as my colleague Rep. Driskell said, it is the great equalizer. And there's so much pride and importance in the schools that we have in my district, and especially in the Glades where you know, the kids just really work so hard and they're given great opportunities, and there's so much effort put into our great school system. I think our school district is great in Palm Beach County. And just this past year, the Glades School for the first time had no schools below a C. So they were really excited by that. And it was a great cause for celebration. So I'm a mom of a 16-year-old and a 19-year-old. So I have a certain perspective on education. And my kids have been through the public schools here in Florida. We moved when they were here from New York when they were very little. And so they've had their whole education here in Florida. And I've had the great fortune of sending them to really good schools and really good programs. And I know everyone doesn't have that, even within Palm Beach County, or even within the state. But we also have some great opportunities for choice programs and things within the school district. And my feeling is that we should put as much money as we can into our public schools and make them as good as we can, rather than giving up on them and saying, well, this school isn't doing well, so let's open up a charter school right next door. Or let's put our taxpayer money into voucher schools and take away money from the public schools, because the public schools have to take all the children. They don't get to choose between the well-behaved ones, the not well-behaved ones, the ones with special needs, the ones who, you know, who are gifted and not gifted. So they have to take them. And I had a friend who started a child at a charter school and had to pull him out, not even for a full semester. And as we know, the charter school then gets to keep the money for that. But the public school has to make do, have the kids, no matter who, and carry on with whatever budget they have from the beginning of the year. So it's really an unfair system in that they're not treated equally. There's no accountability, transparency, and they have different standards. So it's almost like comparing apples to oranges. So I'm looking forward to our conversation today. I know that all three of us are very strong proponents of public education. We were all freshmen these past 2 years, but that didn't stop us from speaking up on the floor and fighting for what we believed in. And it's really been my honor to serve with them. And just on a side note, I'm running for a Senate seat now because my Senate district opened up. And so I hope to continue fighting for these causes in the Senate, where hopefully I have a little bit more say in the process than we do in the House. So thank you for having me. I look forward to the conversation.
We definitely need more senators, you know, with our values and to represent us in our state Senate. So we're looking forward to continuing to support you and making sure that you make it into that Senate seat. So thank you very much, Representative Polsky, for being on. And last but certainly not least, we have Miss Jennifer Webb, representing House District 69 out of Pinellas County. Of course, she's a strong Democratic woman, and she is a graduate from Louisiana State. Ms. Webb, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and, of course, something about your platform?
Sure. So I am a graduate of LSU and also a graduate for Graduate School of USF, which is actually how I ended up in Florida. And I fell in love with Florida and decided to stay. And I have long specialized in workforce and economic development and helping to build businesses. And so that's what I do today. And I have had the privilege of, and I've done that in Massachusetts and in Florida, and feel like education is a foundation for having a strong, high quality workforce, but also promoting a standard of living that that maintains a certain level of dignity for all Floridians, and I think that that's very important. Too often in Florida, we not only import our industry, but we also import our workers and our workforce, and that's unconscionable. Our public schools are doing great things with our students. And the other thing is a message that I've been really pushing forward and promoting is that when we sit, and I'm on 2 education committees, I'm on higher ed and workforce development, and I'm also on K through 12. So I'm on 2 policy committees. And when I sit in these committees, the first committee is always about kind of sets the tone for the rest of the weeks in committee. And both this year and last year, our committee started by talking about chronically underperforming schools, public schools. And I said, well, and how we needed to basically divert resources from our public schools in order to set up a competing system. And I said, well, how many schools are chronically underperforming? It is an infinitesimal amount of our overall public schools. And so the truth is that most of our public schools are doing amazing work. And they are doing amazing work with the broadest public possible. And so what is this really about, this diverting? And I really liked what Representative Driskell talked about, how she feels it's unconstitutional. Education is seen as such an important part of our, is so important to Floridians that we actually passed Article 9 in the Constitution. So we have a constitutional obligation to provide high quality, free, uniform, public education to our students. And what we see is that by setting up voucher programs, that we are eroding that, and we're also eroding the accountability and the responsibility, the accountability of these, spending taxpayers' dollars effectively. And so I'm really excited to talk about this today. This is very important in my district, where actually we have quite a few charter schools and quite a few schools that take vouchers. And my families just want the best education, and they're being told, because private schools and charter schools can advertise in a way that public schools cannot, that their education that is superior to public education, and that does not reflect the data that we have. So I'm excited to talk to y'all today. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad that you're here, and thank you for sharing that, because obviously we are going to debunk a lot of these myths today. So so I want to go back and again talk about, how important this moment is in our history. We're seeing Black Lives Matter protests all over the country. We know the importance of what it is that they're standing for, how they're asking for equity. We know just based on the history of this country that for centuries it was built on economy and not the well-being of people. And so for centuries we have continued to perpetuate this system where some people do well and other people are oppressed. Now I know that we're talking about racial brutality in some workforces, but I want us to keep it real, right? We're talking about education here. And there is, racial injustices that also occur in education. So we're going to keep it really focused. I want us to unpack those meanings. And so I'm going to start off by talking about Brown versus Board of Education. That was a landmark case, right? 1954. It was unanimous. They stated that racial segregation of a child in any public schools was unconstitutional. Okay, big important ruling. It was huge for us, right? And when I say us right now, I'm talking about me as a minority woman, right? Because that allowed me and many of my community members to get a quality public education. Here's what a lot of people miss. After the ruling of Brown versus Board of Education, there was a spike in the privatization of education. There were a lot of private schools that opened after Brown versus Board of Education. Why? Not too difficult to understand what the concept around that was. There were families who did not want to integrate. They wanted to keep segregation alive, and so they opted for keeping their children in private schools. And so what we're seeing now, and I want us to put this juxtaposed, right? We want to talk about what's happening now. This was something that was done. Its inception after, or it's push for it. Let me say that it's push for it after Brown versus Board of Education was to continue to keep inequality. Some people have more, some people have less. It was all good when they were paying it out of their own pockets, because I think at the end of the day, everybody should have the right to say, I want to take my child to that school and I'm willing to pay for it out of my own pocket. But then things got more, they evolved and they turned more complex, because they started to utilize governmental systems to try to move their agenda forward. So here we are, it's 2020, and we see a massive push for charter schools and for voucher programs. And so, a lot of, our female warriors that are on this panel today, our representatives have been talking about this. There is racial inequality. There are charter schools, there are private schools that do not allow children or their families to enroll their children based on a number of things. Could be out of a disability. It could be because of race. It could be because of sexual orientation or their parents' sexual orientation. But what we're seeing here is that we have a government that continues to overfund the privatization of public schools at the demise of the majority of the children, because public schools educate 90% of all children, not just in the state of Florida, but nationwide. So public schools are the great and grand equalizer. And what we're seeing is a funneling of public tax dollars. Okay, and here's where where I want us to really talk about this, because again, everybody should, if a parent has the means and they want to send their child to a private school, go for it. We're not saying not to, but it should be based out of your money because you're sending your child there. But all of our tax dollars are going now to privately run, these are for-profit management companies that are running charter schools, and voucher programs that are continue to discriminate children based on some of the things that not only the representatives have shared, but that I've shared as well. So I want to leave this thought with you. This is from Sam Seaborn. Education is the silver bullet. Education is everything. We don't need little changes. We need gigantic, monumental changes. Schools should be palaces. The competition for the best teachers should be fierce. They should be making six-figure salaries. Schools should be incredibly expensive for government and absolutely free of charge to its citizens, just like the national defense. That's my position. I'm going to open it up to our representatives. Tell us, what are your thoughts? Do you see this as a systematic inequality? What do we do to create this change so that we do not continue to perpetuate things that have been happening in our country for centuries, about giving some people more than others and giving disparate treatment to minority communities? Whoever wants to take that first.
Hi, I'll open it up. Rep Driskell here. I'll open it up, and thank you for that commentary and the question, Karla, because you really help us understand and set the framework to understand just how deep this is, right? And so when we look today at school grading system, the school grading system, which I believe is inequitable, we kind of understand how we arrived there. You have to understand where you've been and your history to understand where you are and where you're going, or perhaps change course for where you're going. And the way that actually I link that past with this present future is the school grading system. So in my district, I've been able to meet with a number of principals, actually not just in my district, public school principals throughout Hillsborough County. And the feedback that I received from them, and they're on the front lines, are that the school grading system is no more than a commentary on the socioeconomic status of the neighborhoods surrounding the schools. So we have the school grading system now, and let's think about what this really does, right? Like if you are a parent and you are an involved parent and you see that the schools in a particular neighborhood are rated D and rated F. Let's say you're in the market for a new home, right? But you want to give your kids the greatest opportunity possible. You're not going to move to the neighborhoods that have D and F schools. So already those schools are kind of like losing out on having stable families move into that neighborhood and into that part of the district where they could come and maybe provide resources and a greater tax base there for that school. And then you've got kids who are attending those schools and they are stamped with the labels of D and F, right? So then does that make them think that they are D or F students? And so then parents then start looking for choice. And my colleague, Rep Polsky she alluded to a really important point, that there is actually choice within public schools, Like magnet schools are great options. There's lots of really wonderful choice within our school system. But now parents might think, okay, in order to give my child a leg up, I'm going to send them to this charter school. Is there room for charter schools in our system? You know, probably. There's some that actually do it right, but there are so many that are doing it wrong, and that are based on a model where you have to just continue pumping kids into the schools in order for it to make a profit, to serve its school board, its corporate board, and that's not right. The last thing I'll mention, I just wanted to clarify what I was alluding to when I was saying in my opening statement about the voucher system being unconstitutional. So this was previously litigated in 2006 in the case Bush versus Holmes, back when Jeb Bush was governor. And at that time, they tried a voucher expansion where they were trying to shift it from vouchers being funded out of tax credits to being funded out of the general revenue fund. Now, the Florida Constitution says that the state is obligated to provide a uniform system of schools, to provide high quality public education, to provide adequate funding in order to do this. And the Supreme Court in that decision said, basically, Florida, you can't do this because you're trying to create two different school systems. And that's not what your Constitution says, and that's not fair. But what happened is, over time, as the Supreme Court became increasingly conservative, we've now had over 20 years of triumvirate Republican rule in the state of Florida, between the legislature, both chambers of the legislature, and the governor. The Supreme Court's become more conservative, and so they tried it again. They tried that legislation in the 2019 session, and it passed, and it was signed into law. And there's nothing that changed in terms of the circumstances that would now make that, you know, paying for vouchers out of the general revenue fund, there's nothing that would now make that unconstitutional. The only thing that changed is that the Supreme Court got more conservative. So we need to wake up, we need to pay attention. If you are concerned about the state of our schools, you need to be concerned about who we are electing at the legislative level, all the way up to the governor's mansion, because it has far-reaching consequences in terms of the legislation that's passed and signed into law, yes, but then also the courts, who are supposed to be the backstop. And so it very well may be that we're going to have to fight, and we're definitely on the ropes when it comes to our public schools. So the next elections are going to have significant consequences.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that response. I have a question for Representative Tina Polsky. So I know that you've worked a lot on gun reform, as all of you have. But, you know, for the last couple of years, we've seen a dramatic push in state legislature to arm teachers, you know, and after a lot of the mass shootings, they use that as a way to catapult into over-militarizing schools. Now, we know that public schools are kept at a different standard than, you know, private schools and other schools. And so, you know, different counties opted for different things. I know that my county in Miami-Dade, now has a school resource officer at every school. But we know that this causes a certain atmosphere. We know that instead of you know, putting more resources into mental health services, into social workers, school psychologists, really helping to not only identify issues but support children and make lives better for them, you know, we see again over militarizing of schools. You know, we're talking about the Black Lives Matter movement. We're talking about how we continue to see systematic racism and things that occur in multiple organizational systems. You, Representative Polsky, have fought hard for gun reform. Tell us about, you know, your position on this and what we do to make things better on that end in terms of, you know, having some really fundamental changes in our schools that provide real justice for children and safe environments, as opposed to over militarizing our workforce.
Thank you, Karla. My county, Palm Beach and Broward, which is also in the hopefully future Senate district, are also not in the Guardian program, and I think Hillsborough and Pinellas as well. I think your larger school districts all decided not to opt in, which is why I filed a bill with Senator Janet Cruz, who is from Hillsborough, to have access to the Guardian funds. There's millions of dollars sitting in this fund, but we can't use it because we aren't a guardian school. What it means to be a guardian school is to have armed teachers or armed principals or people who are not school resource officers. And the response I got to my bill when I inquired of leadership, why can't you, let's talk about this bill, let's hear this bill, is we really like the Guardian program and we're going to try to push it. And so this is a carrot to try to get people, you can get the money if you partake in the Guardian program, and then the money is not available if you don't partake. So, unfortunately, there's money sitting there for safety measures, like things we could do to harden school that don't involve guns. More secure checkpoints or areas of entry, more secure windows or bulletproof glass in each classroom. Things that wouldn't necessarily make the children feel unsafe, but would be safety measures and could have helped in some of our prior tragedies. So I think that is a real shame and a disgrace that money is sitting there not being used because our counties chose, and I believe wisely, to not partake in the Guardian program. We had some of the most difficult, heart-wrenching, emotional debate on the floor about arming teachers when they decided to add teachers, instructional personnel as individuals who could be armed. And I believe that was our 2019 session. And I will never forget, to tie this into kind of our Black Lives Matter and our movement that's going on right now, our Representative Chevron Drones, who emotionally talked about why we need racial bias training and how he would be scared for his Black nephews to be in a classroom with a teacher who had a gun, who if, a kid made a sudden move and and we see this go on with the police all the time, split-second decision. And these people are trained professionals. And now you're talking about teachers who take some courses how to use a gun. That's not going to teach them the instinctual behavior that they need. And being on the streets and being a professional police officer, sitting in a classroom and a kid yelling at them for a grade they got, or two kids fighting, or things that go on in school, and suddenly someone takes out a gun. So I think the Guardian program is very ill-informed, and I'm so glad that our school districts don't partake, but then as a result, we don't have some of the money that we need to harden schools. So I think that there are a lot of things that we can do to help. You mentioned mental health resources. A parent of a Parkland student who was there during the shooting asked me, how do I get more mental health resources for my child now that school's out, from COVID, now that it's the summer? And I gave her some resources that I knew of, but obviously it's not available enough. And we've said this when the bills came out. Yes, they have a portion there for mental health, but it's never enough. There are not social workers in schools. I know in New York they do. My sister-in-law is a social worker in a large school in New York. And she plays the role of a therapist for students, and it's free and it's available, and she's a friend to them. And we don't have that, not at the schools that my children went to, that's for sure. And even after Parkland, it's still not available. So one other thing I wanted to point out, which I think ties in with the first comment, the quote you did about schools should be palaces and our teachers should be paid the highest levels. Just imagine if there was that change in attitude. It really sparked something in me when you said that. I never imagined it that way. But if we, like you said, compared to the military, and our president just bragged about 2 trillion or something number, I can't even fathom, amount of money that he's put into the military. And imagine if the focus instead was $2 trillion to public school systems across the country and what that could do for them. And it is just the most important thing that government can do, is take care of its children, teach them to become the best citizens that they can be. It will cure so many ills down the road: mental health, healthcare, violence, if everyone was given the great opportunities that all of us have been given. So I would love to see that focus. I don't know how much they can do on the state level. Obviously, we don't have a military budget, but we could refocus. We could get corporate tax loophole money to help supplant some of the money in our public school system to really make it the best that it can be, instead of just kind of skating by and giving the minimum amount each year. It's really a question of priorities, and we really could do that if we put our minds to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So this next question is for our House Representative Jennifer Webb. So I know that you focus a lot on competitive workforce. You know, in the public school system, and I know that our representative Driskell, she mentioned this as well, you know, has suffered a lot with the systematic changes that occurred when grading schools became a thing. This has been over 20 years, communities, and I'm going to specifically say communities of color, Black and brown communities were negatively impacted. Real estate rates went down. You know, there's a stigma, again, these communities who we know this is intrinsically tied to socioeconomic levels, not aptitudes of these communities. It's the inability to get the resources that they need in order for them to flourish and minimize those achievement gaps. But nevertheless, these grading policies have really disenfranchised our communities. I know that, you know, you have worked hard for the competitive workforce. When these changes occurred and testing took on, you know, turned itself into the beast that it is, and there was so much accountability and so much working towards this grading system, it took a lot of resources from our vocational technical coursework, from our classes inside our public schools, especially our high schools. You know, I'm a special ed teacher, by the way. I'm a middle school special ed science teacher, and I know that a lot of my kids are still very effective and they are contributing to our society and our community. Did a lot of them go to college when they grew up? No, but that's okay. There is a place for everybody in this great community. But I do feel that they were disenfranchised because those elective courses, those vocational technical courses did not exist in our communities because of the overemphasis on testing. And they had to take all these repeat courses in order to make the grade for this test. You know, Representative Webb, tell us a little bit about how you feel about that. And of course, you can add on to the rest of the conversation that has already occurred.
Thank you so much for asking me that question. And I am going to, okay, good. The truth is that we say in Florida that we value innovation and flexibility in the classroom, but what we've set up disincentivizes that for our public schools. Meanwhile, in our charter schools and in our private schools, we allow that flexibility despite the fact that they're receiving taxpayer dollars and now from the general revenue. And they're able to do a lot more of those creative, hands-on, experiential learning that we know. And I want to thank you for your vocation of reaching kids. Middle school kids alone would be difficult, but middle school kids in special ed classrooms, that's amazing. My spouse taught for years in the alternative school system in high school. And to your point, she taught alternative high school students, and all of her students went on to post-secondary education. It wasn't college or universities necessarily. It could have been automobile body restoration or an apprenticeship program at, you know, with a union or a building trade. Some of them did go on to college and university. Actually, one of her students majored in Chinese and is now, you know, works for the government and is one of the very few African-American students or young professionals who is fluent in Mandarin and is an ambassador to the United States over in China. And so, but it took flexibility of education. It took small classrooms. I mean, if we would honor our Constitution and maintain those small class sizes, we would be able to meet the demands of our students. And it also took not siphoning off funds for a competing school system. And you know, this is a school system, and I'm grateful that you mentioned the Florida Competitive Workforce Act. I have the privilege of being the first out lesbian elected to any higher office in the state of Florida. And my spouse and I could not, like our children could not go to some of these schools that accept publicly funded vouchers. Right now, these schools are discriminating based on sexual orientation and gender identity. They discriminate based on religion. And the state allows them to do this. And this became a huge debate on the floor of the House this year. And so I'm really grateful for Rep. Driskell taking us back to 2008 and to 2010, when we passed the constitutional amendment, But and what that looks like today, or in more recent years, is it looks like a complete unwillingness to make sure that our public funds are being used for the public in the broadest sense for all of our children. And that's unconscionable. It's unconscionable that I have a school board member, candidate, who's running. She teaches at Keswick School here. This school would not allow Jewish families to send their kids there. And she doesn't, and she is running for school board member of our public school board. That's unbelievable to me. It's unbelievable to me that I wouldn't be able to send my children down the street to a school, and that our taxpayer dollars are funding those schools. And I do not want to give any kind of misconceptions. There are some amazing schools that are private that do great work, or that are charter. Academy Prep is in our area. They deal with the whole child, and they also do not discriminate. They don't use taxpayers' dollars to discriminate. We have a lot of work to do, and what we can do is we can pass some real common sense reform to make sure that our taxpayer dollars aren't going towards creating a system that explicitly excludes certain children. They can discriminate based on hair length, hair texture, I mean, all sorts of stuff. And the crazy thing, and to Representative Polsky's point, if you get into the school and you get the voucher is given to the private school. And then if it doesn't work out because they find out that you have two mommies, or because you come to school with, because they find out that your family is Jewish, they kick you out. That money doesn't go back with the child to the public school. That money stays for that year, or that's some, I think it's half a year for that private institution. And we're not only emboldening racism and discriminate and homophobia and transphobia and discrimination, we're also, last session, we passed their marketing plan into our state statute. We said, if you exhaust this market of lower income individuals, once you reach a certain threshold, then automatically we will increase the threshold for what your parents can bring in and still be able to get, still be able to receive that voucher. We don't do that for any other private business. We don't write their marketing plan into our statute. There is no Democrat, and there's really no honest fiscal conservative who would think that that's a good idea. And so even our Republican colleagues have moved very far afield of their tenets. And of course, it's an assault to our tenets of equality and inclusion.
Thank you so much, Representative, for answering that question. Representative Polsky, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to what Jennifer said. For the folks out there watching, I just want to explain a little bit about the process. When we had the voucher school bill, we are in the minority, and we know that the bill is going to pass. And this is not only a priority of past administrations, but our governor and our the Speaker of the House. And so we knew it was going to pass, but with flying colors, as it did. But what we try to do with this bill and with others is we say, make a bad bill better. So we put amendments on, knowing it's going to pass, but it shouldn't be as bad as the original intent. And unfortunately, our amendments almost universally get struck down all the time. In particular, our amendments on this bill, the voucher bill that Rep. Webb was talking about, were specifically that if you are a voucher school, a private school that wants to engage in the voucher program, and there are plenty of private schools who don't. A lot in my area do not participate. It's either they're too expensive, the $7,000 or whatever they get, $10,000 does not cover enough. They choose not to participate for their own reasons, and that's fine. But if they choose to participate, then they have to abide by all the non-discrimination standards that are required by law. And so that's a simple amendment. You want voucher schools, you want taxpayer money to go to to allow people to go to private school and it will help them financially to go, fine. We know we're going to lose this battle for the moment. At least abide by non-discrimination standards. And that amendment failed. They said it's not necessary. But there are studies and absolute proof that there are schools, as my colleagues have pointed out, that discriminate on many different bases. So that's just kind of a behind the scenes of kind of how the legislation works. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of compromise when it comes to something pretty radical like this. And we tried to just make it a little bit better, and we were turned down. So
Rep. Polsky, I'm so glad that you brought that out, because not only when that amendment failed, then we said, fine, if you want to discriminate and the majority party wants to publicly fund discrimination, then at least be transparent. Make sure that those policies are easily identifiable on your website so that parents don't send their kids there and then later have to pull them out. Because what we also know is that when that children who go to private schools using vouchers and then go back lose 2 grade levels of learning. That's 2 grade levels of learning loss. And so we said, great, okay, so this is going to happen anyway. Let's at least let parents know, let them be savvy consumers, put those policies out there and outward facing. You can't hide them and bury them in your student policy handbook that you're given after you turn over your voucher. And they shot that amendment down as well. It was unbelievable. And I am so honored to be fighting on this issue with Rep. Driskell and Rep. Polsky and the other Democrats, because it was not for want of trying or for making the arguments or for bringing up the unconstitutionality that these pass. It is simply because we need more people who believe in public education to turn out and vote people like Rep. Driskell, soon to be Senator Polsky, and myself into office.
And I just wanted to, Karla, I know you probably have more questions and want us to move on, but I just wanted to add one thing, which is that, and I appreciate the comments from Rep. Polsky about the process. For those of you on the line, I don't know if you know this, but you can actually watch our proceedings on the Florida channel. They are broadcast. You can pretty much see it with any sort of cable subscription that you might have, or you can watch them online. And as we have important debates, it would be great for you to tune in sometimes when you can, and to try to help get the word out about what's really happening in the legislature, because we bear witness to it every day when we're in session. But I think we need even more people to know and try to understand what's really happening in some of the debates that come from the other side on the floor. Like sometimes it would just make your head spin, but to really help lift up and spotlight what's going on, because I cannot, my reasonable, rational mind, regardless of my party, cannot get to a place where I understand how we would be spending this much money on a program and not provide for accountability and transparency.
That's right. That's right.
And when we talk about transparency and accountability, in the 2019 session, we said when we created this voucher, when this voucher system was created by the majority party in the legislature, we said, okay, well, can we at least hold them to generally acceptable accounting practices, GAAP practices? That's what we hold nonprofits to who receive public funding. Can we at least make sure that the voucher goes with them and then immediately goes back when the child returns back? Can we? Okay, no, and they voted against both of those amendments. And finally we said, well then let's just make sure, because this is also a way that scammers have raked in millions of dollars, even here in Pinellas County. And so I said, well, I don't want our tax dollars going to people who have already been convicted of fraud in this space. Can we at least exclude those individuals? And they voted against that amendment as well. And so this is, I mean, it is hard to believe. And I'm hearing this like thinking, oh, the folks haven't been necessarily paying attention. And it is mind-boggling that that the majority party is so unwilling to hold these schools accountable and to make sure that we are spending our taxpayer dollars and in a responsible way.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you are just tuning in, These women are keeping it real. We are having a real conversation here about what's going on, equity in education. This is Wise Women Wednesdays, brought to you by Ruth List, Florida. If you don't know who these important women are, get to know them. We have Representative Driskell from Hillsborough County, Representative Polsky from Palm Beach County, and Representative Webb from Pinellas County. And we're going to keep on talking to them. You're going to get to know more about them and why they're so important for us in our state legislature. We want you to follow them. We want you to help them. We want you to elevate and support these women who are fighting not just for our children and equity in education, but of course, our entire community. So we have a question that has come up, and I want to ask it to all of you, but we're going to ask it in a rapid fire way. So we want you to keep it nice and sweet and concise, okay? This question is, what action will you take to address ongoing racial disparities in education? Representative Polsky, I'll go with you first.
What actions can we take? I mean, I think we just laid out what we would like to do, which is to make sure that anywhere that our public dollars are going to do not allow any kind of racial discrimination amongst all the other kinds of discrimination. But certainly we did talk about racial discrimination. We talked about, Rep. Webb talked about, you know, hair texture, hair color, sorry, not color, but, you know.
It could be color too.
Yeah, there are policies in place that don't allow certain hairstyles in certain schools. We want all schools to abide by the non-discrimination policies that our public schools have to live by. But certainly we would do everything we can to make sure that our public schools have the best policies in place, that we have, as we talked about, some mental health counseling to help. A lot of, you know, racial bias incidents come from individuals with insecurities and bad homes, and they bully people because they have to take it out on others. There are instances all the time, but people need to be trained on it better. We need to just put more of a focus. And, you know, we're trying, as we try to do this with our police forces for training, we need to do that with our teachers, with our administrators, and make sure that they have the best education that they can in order to provide the best and safest learning environment for all of our students.
Representative Webb?
Sure. So while I would love to dig deeper into the disparities that track particularly our Black boys into special education classrooms, I would love to get to that level of granularity. Right now, I think and I would love to see past like testing and primary language, so that we're not testing proficiency in English, we're testing your proficiency in a subject matter. And that would really help our Spanish speaking, and in my community, Vietnamese speaking students. But really right now what we need to do is we need to undo this voucher system and really put in place accountability and non-discrimination policies, because that is kind of the larger thing that needs to happen, and then we can get down to the more granular aspects of educating our kids.
Thank you. Representative Driskell?
So I'll continue to zoom out because I feel like Rep. Polsky had us here and Webb got us here, and I'm going to go here because what happens is, so last year, Representative Camilla Brown in Orlando and I actually carried, it's known as the Crown Act, which prevents hair discrimination in our public schools. We got one hearing in the Senate. We could not get a hearing in the House for something that very simple, for something that was making national news at the time that students of color in particular were dealing with. So what are we going to do? We're going to try to use this moment where we have civil unrest and we have people waking up to the fact that there's structural and institutional racism. We're going to try to push for policies like that. But the reason why I mentioned to you that we weren't able to get a hearing is for everybody on this call to understand that when we're in the minority party, we don't control the committees. We don't control when things come up for a hearing. So if we really want to get transformative policy passed, we really have to flip seats. I'm honored to have been re-elected without an opponent. And so now my entire focus is going to be on helping other people win their races so that we can protect our incumbents, but also so that we can flip seats. because it needs to be far more balanced in the legislature right now. I have a friend who always jokes that Florida has the population of California, but the legislature of Alabama. We tend to be a purple state. You see that we're always a toss-up in the presidential elections, and that's because our people are not, when you look at us as at a mix, we're not too far to the left or to the right. And I think that the legislature should do a much better job. Well, I would like to see it go, much more progressive. We should certainly do a much better job of reflecting the realities of our state, which is not to be so far conservative. And we should really account for ideas based on their merit, and ideas about equity and racial equity in education certainly is meritorious. So that's what I'm going to do. And I know what my colleagues are going to do. We're going to try to flip some seats so that we can actually pass the transformative policies that we need to. And if you need information on who to support, reach out to me. I'll help you. I'll help you direct the money to good candidates.
Thank you very much. So, I'll just shoot out a few ideas for all three of you. I definitely think that statewide, we should consider embedding ethnic studies into our public school systems. I believe that maybe we incentivize our public schools that are already doing trainings on cultural responsiveness, on implicit bias. These type of trainings have to occur in order for us to organically be able to change these systems that do disincentivize certain groups of people, in order for us to really create equity in our education from the granular level all the way up to how we get it funded on the state level. Again, I want to thank you all. We're not done yet. I want to share a brief fact. We've been talking about inequality or inequity in funding and disparate treatment and discrimination happening in some sectors, and how it affects education. During COVID, we learned a lot about our public schools. First of all, anybody that's a teacher out there, shout out to you because you have done an incredible job. And to all the parents out there, shout out to you too, because you became our new rookie teachers of the year when you started to teach at home. It's been really tough, but our response has been seen by people. I mean, public schools, we're giving curriculum. We're trying to make sure that their mental health of children was something that was of importance to everybody, making sure that they were learning, that they were being fed. Our public schools continue to feed children in their communities, just providing as much resources as they could under these unfathomable circumstances. We got CARES Act money from the federal government, and here's something for everybody to kind of sit on and marinate for a little bit, okay? We got millions of dollars from our federal funds for the CARES Act. And Governor DeSantis gave $30 million for scholarships and $15 million to private schools out of our CARES Act. Again, when we talk about what we need for our public schools and how they continue to provide things for the entire community, I can speak for Miami-Dade. When we were out handing out food in communities, we didn't ask, let me see your school ID. We gave to every single child that was hungry and came by, because that's who we are. We care about providing for every child, no matter what. And so we see that, this is systematic. Of course, we have a governor who believes in privatizing public schools and privatizing public education. And these are things that we have to fight back against. I want to let each one of you representatives close off, give us a 1-minute statement. Tell us a little bit of how to follow you. We want to make sure that we have your information. So go ahead and tell us, do your closing statements and tell us how to follow you so that we can continue to support the great work that you're doing in our state legislature. I'll start off with you, Representative Driskell.
Thank you. I just set a stopwatch so that I know when a minute is, because when you give a politician a microphone, I mean, we really just take liberty. So thank you so much for this really wonderful opportunity. I do appreciate that. At the beginning of the conversation, we all put in the chat our social media handles, our email addresses. Feel free to stay connected. I think there were a lot of important issues that emerged out of the conversation today, and it's almost making me wonder if it's worthwhile for Ruth's List to have almost like subgroups who can focus on particular issues that they care about around some of the big ones like education, so we can continue conversations like this. We can get you information. I saw the questions in the chat, how can we get the information out about when the legislature is doing, addressing important legislation related to education. So certainly I'll put that on myself, and we can all take more responsibility in sharing that information. The last piece, I did want to get to a question that was in the chat about, how our education, our schools are funded. Schools get a lot of funding from local revenue. You're right about that. That increases educational inequity because it's all, property taxes. I do think that looking at direct funding is something that we should do. Just want to make sure that I address that question, but please follow me, Fentrice for FL. I'm always happy to talk education. It is one of the main reasons why I ran for office and why I continue to do what I do in Tallahassee. So thank you.
Thank you. Representative Polsky?
Sure, thank you so much for having me. I also put my information in the chat. Would love any of your help, with the Senate run and helping to flip seats. Keep Jennifer Webb in her seat because she's facing a tough Republican opponent, and she flipped it 2 years ago, and they're coming after her. And so did Rep. Driskell, but they, I guess, couldn't find someone to run against her. So we're so happy she got reelected. And Ruthless in general, because they help women candidates build the bench. And I took my very first training from Ruthless to learn how to be a candidate, how to fundraise, what to do. So I really appreciate the start they gave me and the support I've had from them in both races. One thing you mentioned about the disproportionality of funding is so important. As you said, 90% of our students go to public school, and yet the public schools do not receive 90% of the potential revenue out there that's available to education. So we have to keep fighting. 2 years, we're gonna have a gubernatorial race. That's huge because that is the direction that the state will go with public education. Not to mention, of course, this November, what's going on with our state legislature, with our presidential election, which can really change the focus for everything. So let's hope we have a big wave. We all have a lot of work to do to get us there. Everything we've talked about could be fixed if we had the right numbers in the legislature. And if we had a legislature that worked together. It's very disheartening. People say, why can't you, work together? It's just not the way it goes. Our numbers need to be much closer, and then we will. Or if we had one chamber that was Democratic, one chamber that was Republican, or a governor who was Democratic, we'd have to work together in a better way. And that's what I would love to see happen, because better legislation can come out of compromise and working together. So thank you so much for having us. It's been really fascinating. Karla, you have the most beautiful smile, really, I've ever seen. So thank you all. It's great to see my colleagues. I miss you all terribly in this COVID world. And thank you all who were on this call. And we appreciate the kind of people who are on this call are the engaged people. So I know you're engaged, get your friends to be engaged too. And thank you very much.
Representative Webb?
Sure, and I will keep it to a minute because we have a minute. So, 11. Well, so I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I am, as Representative Polsky mentioned, my district actually voted for Trump in 2016, and so they are coming after me in 2020. And they found a female opponent to run against me, and so it is all hands on deck. We are getting ready for the battle of our lives. We are making sure that people understand the importance of keeping the seats that we picked up last cycle, this cycle. And specifically, I mean, my race is absolutely one of the top retention seats. I'm also going to give some shout outs to women, to other female candidates. So Joy Goff-Marcel, she's in a very tough race. Geraldine Thompson, Senator Representative Geraldine Thompson, who's amazing. She's in a tough race. So is Dolores Hogan Johnson. And throw a guy in there, Andrew Learned. That's a seat that we can absolutely hold on to, but we need all hands on deck. And we know that empowered, enlightened women can really shape the future of our state. And for all of you that are on this call today, please bring in 2 or 3 of your friends and neighbors and make sure that they're turning out to vote, make sure that they're engaged, make sure that that you have contributed either your time, talent, or treasure to one of those campaigns that I mentioned. This is honestly going to be a very tough year because we did something that we've never done before or in recent history, which is pick up so many seats last cycle. And so we have to hold on to those, and we have other great opportunities for picking up new seats, but unless we get the numbers, we can't get the policy. And I'm so grateful to Ruthless for all the work that you do and elevating and promoting female candidates, and for your help in race specifically. And it's been a pleasure to be here with Rep. Polsky and Rep. Driskell.
Thank you all so much. So again, please make sure you follow these women, Representative Driskell out of Hillsborough County, Representative Polsky out of Palm Beach, and Representative Webb out of Pinellas County. Follow them on social media, like them, share their information, support them, fight for them when you see somebody attacking. This is how we elevate women. And if you got some money, go ahead and contribute to their causes as well. We need more women like you helping us to fight for equity in education and fight for equity in all aspects of all of our communities. Again, we want to thank Ruthless Florida. If you are watching this, it's because they are hosting this forum for you. Please find them on social media as well, and become a member of Ruthless Florida. Remember that Ruthless Florida, their mission is to identify, recruit, train, mentor, and elect Democratic pro-choice women to all levels of office in Florida. And that's who these women are. We are so proud of the work that you are doing, and we want you to keep on being the fierce women that you are. To everybody that is on the call, that is on Zoom, that is on Facebook, thank you for taking some time to get to know these women. Please follow them, and please follow Ruthless as well. Everybody, take care of yourselves, stay safe, and God bless.